I mean, how many times can Ellen White emphasize the same point in this passage? Time and again she's saying, come back to the Bible. She says man's duty to God and to his fellow man has been distinctly specified in God's Word. Yet, but few of you are obedient to the light given. See, there's enough light in the Word, but people are not obeying the Word. She continues saying, additional truth is not brought out. What is not brought out? Additional what? Additional. Does Ellen White have additional truth? No. Additional truth is not brought out. But God has, through the testimonies, simplified the great truths already given in His own chosen way, brought them before the people to awaken and impress the mind with them, that all may be left without what? All may be left without excuse. Now this evening, I would like to mention some things that Ellen White talks about which fit into this category. This category of people who claim to be obeying the Bible, but are really violating the Bible. And some of these issues are controversial. But you know I'm not afraid of controversy. Now allow me first of all to talk a little bit about what Ellen White had to say about bicycles. Did you know that Ellen White condemned bicycles? Somebody says, Pastor Bohr, how in the world could you ever believe that Ellen White was a true prophet if she says you're not supposed to buy a bicycle? You're not supposed to ride a bicycle. Well, the fact is that her testimony about bicycles is found in Volume 8 of the Testimonies, page 51. And in order to understand her counsel, you have to understand what was happening at that time. You have to place yourself there. You see, a bicycle was an expensive item back then. People were mortgaging their homes and spending their life savings to buy bicycles so that they could outdo their neighbor. And then they would take the road and they would race, and they were killing one another by racing their bicycles. And so Ellen White in that context says that we should not fall into this bicycle craze, as she called it. In fact, she spoke about God's people spending money to gratify this enthusiasm and of its bewitching influence. Now, what principles did Ellen White take into account when she gave her counsel about bicycles? You know, today she might talk about the automobiles we drive. The principle applies. She might speak about the clothing that we purchase. She might speak about the jewelry that we buy and we use. She might speak about the extravagant homes that we live in, if she was living today. Now, what was her principle? She tells us in this page, 8 Testimonies, page 51, there was a striving for the mastery, each trying to outdo the other. There was strife and contention as to which should be the greatest. Is there a principle involved here? Of course, this means love your neighbor as yourself, but beat him in the race. You know, I find it funny to see boxers pray before they get into the ring to beat the other guy's brains out. And football players to take the football field and grab each other's hands and pray before they go out and maim and hurt their fellow human beings. You see, there's a principle: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Yet these same people would never take time to give a Bible study, but they have plenty of time to play football. Are you understanding the principle that Ellen White is expounding here? Furthermore, she said that money was being spent which should have been used to advance the cause of God. Now, taking the principles of what Ellen White spoke about, was she amplifying the issue of love for God and love for our fellow human beings in this particular area of bicycles? Yes, she was. Was she right within her historical context? Yes. Would the principles apply to other items of behavior today? Absolutely yes. Not to bicycles anymore, because you can buy a bicycle for $50 or $60 today. And people aren't killing one another, you know. Although they're bicycle races like the Tour de France, you know, you're not racing with your neighbor to try and beat your neighbor in a bicycle race. But it applies in other areas of life. Now let me mention another thing. Theater attendance. By the way, when Ellen White talks about going to the theater, she's not talking about going to the movies like we do today. She's talking about actually seeing a live performance in the theater. But the principle is the same, isn't it? Because your eyes and your ears are involved. You know, it's interesting today, I hear a lot of young people say, I don't see anything wrong with going to the theater. I don't see anything wrong with going to the movies. And invariably, I tell them, well, if you don't see anything wrong with it, I'm going to pray that the Lord will fix your eyes. Because there's nothing good to be seen in the movies today. Nothing. Let me ask you, do any movies today teach you to love your neighbor as yourself? Do they teach you to respect your neighbor's wife? Do they teach you to use pure language? Or do they teach you to use God's name in vain? Do they teach you to respect human life? Do they teach you to be more like Jesus? Do they give you a better spirit of service to your fellow man? Do they lead you to love God more? My, it's silent in here. Allow me to read you a statement by Ellen White, Adventist Home, page 516. And I find it unconscionable that many youth leaders today in the Adventist church are saying that there's nothing wrong with kids going to the movie theater. I just don't know how they can give that counsel. Ellen White says this, and you tell me if this is true. See, we have to be honest with ourselves, don't we? See, we fool ourselves into thinking, well, you know, the Bible doesn't say don't go to the theater, does it? Is there any text in the Bible that says, thou shalt not go to the movies? So I can go. See, that's the excuse that some people use. She says this, among the most dangerous resorts for pleasure is the theater. Instead of being a school for morality and virtue, and this is in her day, before Hollywood, she says, instead of being a school for morality and virtue, as is so often claimed, it is the very hotbed of immorality. Is that true? What does she continue saying? Vicious habits and sinful propensities, that is inclinations, are strengthened and confirmed by these entertainments. True or false? If we're honest with ourselves, true or false? You know it's true. Low songs, lewd gestures, expressions, and attitudes deprave the imagination and debase the morals. True or false? True. She says this, every youth who habitually attends such exhibitions will be corrupted in principle. There is no influence in our land more powerful to poison the imagination, to destroy religious impressions, and to blunt the relish for the tranquil pleasures and sober realities of life than theatrical amusements. You know very well that going